stage door.
5, 4,
3, 2, 1.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Stage Door. This is Dave Hondel. We have author Anthony Obas with us tonight, and I'm really excited to have him with us. So how you doing, Anthony?
Dave, thank you so much for having me. I'm feeling good, man. Stay safe out here. Can't complain. Stay in quarantine. I mean, just a good time to be creative.
I was thinking the same thing. You know, I've been doing so many shows in the last few weeks, and we all kind of talk about the quarantine. And the one thing that comes up, the common denominator of this whole thing, and obviously there's not a lot of positives from, you know, what's going on in the world. But I guess one positive thing is that, you know, it's a chance for us to be creative and create something that we've always wanted to create, or do something that we've always wanted to do, never had time, spend time with your family, spend time with, you know, with the people that you love the most. I mean, there are positive things that come out of this, and, you know, hopefully we can come out of this thing, you know, creating, you know, bigger and better things as artists. So, you know, I'm so happy to have you on the show tonight because, you know, speaking about that, your book, you know, Shifting Your Music into a Career, Volume 1, you know, this is something that, you know, when we talked to each other before, you know, a couple weeks ago, right away in my head, I was like, you know what, this is perfect for our masterclass series. And so this is really section 2 of our masterclass series that we hold. So, you know, again, thank you for being on the show. And, you know, I can't wait to talk about your book tonight.
Thank you for having me, man. I'm just pumped, man. You know, there's one thing I'm very passionate about. I'm passionate about creatives, artists taking what they're passionate about and just ultimately making income out of it. I think it's a huge possibility, and it's a huge way for people can actually start becoming entrepreneurs. So, I mean, just being on a podcast and just talking about that, it just brings up energy, you know, and I just want to bring that energy on the podcast as well, too.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the one thing about that, you know, and talking about, you know, making it into a career, you know, when we talk to artists, I think that, and it's no fault of their own, you know, when you're a creative person, you know, you create, that's what you do. You're creating your art, you're playing your music, you're creating your lyrics, but not everybody is, you know, in tune to the business side of being an artist. And I think that that's really important if you want to do it as a career, you know, to, like you say, I mean, you know, you have to be an entrepreneur. You have to push your music out. And let's talk about how to do that through your book. So what's the overall message that you're sending with your book?
Right. So, I mean, the first book, again, like volume 1, 46 pages long. All right. You're going to get case studies. You get my personal observations. Because I've been in the kind of the indie scene, as I like to call it, the industry for about 3 years now. And also I've worked with major labels. I used to work with UMG. Used to work for Sony ATV Publishing. And I used to work with them, and it was cool. But, you know, I was given life a lot from the industry, as we call it. And, you know, the book kind of goes from branding, right, which is this idea of, you know, replicating brands that were successful. So we're going to get into that chapter, to just talking about overall live performance. How can you leave a great impression live performance wise? How do you raise money in general if you don't have it? And then you also have social media. And then to the final chapter of how can we get that deal and get that deal from that executive that says, hey, you know, we can be signed or partly signed. Or if we don't want to be signed, you know, we can be independent. And that's, again, it's all in 46 pages. The book is not supposed to be intensively long. It's looking for emerging artists that range, let's say Instagram ranges between 0 and, let's say, 50,000 followers. And that's real authentic, 50,000 followers, not like I buy robots. So, yeah, I mean, that's the point of the book, is to introduce the value. We also have reference package as well, too. So, like, articles from other music biz that also support the argument even further, right? And people have seen that the book really works when they come to these shows, when they're applying it to their own career. So I'm just excited to go into further depth into the chapters as well, too, as we talk about branding, live performance, social media, and also just how can we strike that deal as well, too.
You know, talk about the case studies. You mentioned case studies before. And talk about how did you come across these case studies? What did you do to get that information? I guess, who did you talk to?
Yeah, so a lot of these case studies are from articles, right? So we've had Travis Scott. I'm trying to make the case studies, relatable to the kind of the audience I'm reaching to, which is the audience between 16 to about 32, 33-ish. So Gen Y, Gen Z. So I use Travis Scott, which everybody kind of knows. I used Frank Ocean. I used De La Soul, which is like throwback. I used a lot of hip hop references in the books as well too, to kind of help me as well too. Tribe Called Quest I used as well too. To kind of draw those. I used Drake too. I try to use common popular artists that people are aware of to kind of, get the valuable information. How can it draw in the indie scene or that emergent? Because it is applicable to the emergency. It's just people are not talking about it constantly, if that makes sense. So I dig deep in Forbes magazine, some DIY musicians, but also like some of these were skiing. Like, this is just business 101. You could just see it without being like writing an article, if that makes sense. So Forbes wrote an article on De La Soul and how they raised the Kickstarter campaign for their album and the Anonymous, and used that as a way to talk about the importance of crowdfunding as an artist, right? So the case studies are so relatable, so funny, and they just bring life to any artist or manager or publicist or emerging artist reading. It just brings life and it brings comedy, because Ari Hurston and Donna Tasman, who are kind of like the gods of the music business, their books are cool, but they don't really resonate with the group that I'm trying to attack, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, talk about Tribe Called Quest, because that's a group from ways back, and a lot of their stuff came out really before the age of social media. And talk about that, how they worked their music into into a cult following, really, because I mean it's actually one of my wife's favorite groups, and so I know a little bit about them. And she's always been part of that scene, and the New York scene, and the hip hop scene coming up, all the way from the 70s till today. And, groups like that, it's really, social media has really changed the game. But, a lot of these groups became famous before social media even started. So, all grassroots stuff. So, I mean, what did that case study tell you about that group, and how did they become, known in so many circles?
Perfect. So, the Tribe Called Quest case study came from Mirror, Mirror of an Artist. So my chapter on Mirror, Mirror of an Artist says that to start as a brand, right, you don't have an identity. You really don't have an identity. Or as an artist, you don't have an identity. But what you could do is you could sample, right? You can sample from other people that are successful, right, and replicate what made them successful and replicate that to your brand. Now, you don't have to be solely from that one person, but you can draw what works for them. So, for example, I mean, for me, a lot of people should know this, but I'm a huge Stephen A. Smith guy. I love Stephen A. Smith. I try to be a sports analyst with Stephen A. Smith. And, his ranting and his outbursts kind of influenced me to do my Obas rant. So with Tribe Called Quest, when they were coming out with albums like The Low End Theory or Midnight Marauders, what they used to do is they used to sample a lot from a lot of early 70s and early 80s music. There's a huge documentary. I can't really think about it. I think it's called Beat, Rhymes, and Rhythm, if I'm getting the title right. So they used to do it. They used to take samples of those old 70s and 80s jazz, mix it with a lot of funk, right? Because funk and house, and that's how they created their own sound, right? So they were able to, and that's how they ended up taking their identity. So what worked in the 70s and 80s in terms of, jazz and house, jazz and funk, they was able to take those samples, flip it into their own spin, and make the brand that they have called Tribe Called Quest, right? And they grew straight from the roots of New York. They grew and grew and grew, and they kept using that sample, it kept bonding, and they had like that root of just, of a different breed of hip hop, right? And they took that root and continued to spread along, not only just here, but also all the way to as far as East Asia, if that makes sense, right? So that's how they ended up sampling their branding, right? De La Soul is another one. Is another great example of De La Soul, right? You have house music, right? They took that brand of house styling and branded that towards themselves. What worked as house music that was very popular in the 80s, they took that and flipped it on themselves, right? And that also drew a following, that drew fans because they were familiar with that branding and it didn't kind of make them uncomfortable. So that's what kind of mirror of an artist kind of tackle, right? It's sampling brands that work and really sampling brands that work, sounds that work in the past that people love and truly appreciate it, and bringing it back to your brand, right, and your why, and then flipping it back to the people in your own creative way. I think that makes sense, right?
No, it does. It does make sense. I wanted to get into the branding. So this is a perfect time to, talk more about that, because I think it's the most important. Personally, being in the music business for 25 years, I think branding is one of the most important things that an artist can do. Have an identity in who they are, because you're not going to appeal to everybody. I think there's artists that want to put out great music, which is fine. But if you don't have an identity, you're gonna just get you're gonna be a great lounge musician maybe, or great on a cruise ship. But if you're not branding yourself to kind of have a niche, so to speak, a niche crowd, or a cult following in a certain brand, I don't know that you're going to have success commercially. You may, like I said, you may be you may make a living, but if you don't brand yourself and have an identity, I mean, I don't know if you agree with that, but that's the way I look at it.
It's true, and to use the perfect word, I even use that word in the book, niche. A niche artist is so crucial. An artist that's able to capture a small fan or a small group and able to kind of build it into their own cult. You know what I'm saying? So if you don't have a brand identity or a brand message behind what you are doing and why you're doing music, it's going to be hard for you to capture that niche audience, that niche, the niche, unique community. You get what I'm saying? Like, I think of a band that's able to do that. I mean, I'm going to use them in the next volume, but Kiss. I mean, Kiss had their own Kiss community. Like, they had their own community of fans that were just Kiss diehard fans. They used to get limited editions of stuff and exclusive to when they was releasing shows. That's what happens when brand identity becomes strong. You start developing that brand community, right? And you need that in the music industry so importantly, because that delivers value, right? And that delivers value so that you're able to sit down, which brings us to another part of our chapter, which is can we get a deal? It brings value towards executives. It brings value to these labels where you can now make the decision of, I can either take my career to the next level, right, and take this advance right now, and then go through the recoupment process, or I can do what's working currently, which has been gaining me success independently, and just continue to do that, right? Because you became a niche artist. I love it how you segmented that. That's beautiful. That's beautiful. I love it.
Yeah. And talk about can we get a deal? And this is another thing that I talk a lot about on my shows with artists that are already established, right? And one of the things that I always talk to them about, to talk about the indie artist, is how you interact with people when you're not on stage, right? When you're going into, let's say, a meeting, and just how you treat the receptionist should be just as important as how you treat the executive that you're about to meet. And these are things that, I think is important as an indie artist to understand, that it's not just about your music. If people can't deal with you as a person, they're not going to want to sign you as an artist. I mean, I think it's also important to think about that, because there's a lot of times that indie artists don't have, a big management team. They don't have, an entourage of people that they're paying and working for them, because they don't have the money. So how you treat that executive, and how you treat everybody you walk in to the building, is important, right?
Right, and you got to carry yourself as a business. Again, artists. This is the problem with artists these days, and this comes up with like the whole entire book. The goal is for you to carry yourself as a business, right? You are the business. So what you do, whatever you do, whether it means going on social media, whatever it means, whatever you do, whether in terms of talking to people, that carries along, right? That really says something about your business, right? A lot of artists don't realize that their music is part of the business, that them being an artist is part of their business. That is a whole entity. You are a business, right? So, for example, I mean, like, I'm going to use somebody just randomly, but Drake is a business. Like, he is, his brand is the product. And that's what a lot of artists are not realizing when they're stepping into these deals. When they are getting ready to step into a career, is that their brand is the business. Their brand is the business. And without carrying yourself both professionally, both with integrity, with humility, and all those good qualities, you really set your business back if you don't have those good qualities, if that makes sense, So you really need to have those qualities to increase your value so that you're able to now take the product that you have musically and convert it into income. You need that. Like, I cannot stress that enough about creating brand value and having those specific qualities and having that, again, like we talked about earlier, that brand identity so that you can turn that into income.
Let's talk about how they really make money. I mean, what do the artists need to do? I mean, to really turn their indie arts into a career where it's not so much independent anymore. It's more of a career for them, and they can get signed either by a label or even in their own label if they want to do an indie label. It becomes something that is well known out there that they can start making some big money. So what do they need to do to really get to that level?
Amazing. So part of the situation is also so the first part is, again, it's live performance. Like, that's what we need to tackle. Live performance, touring, right? Because we know that touring makes money, right? We know that touring makes money. Like, you sell out a show, you bring 260 people, you charge at $10 a ticket. I'm just making up random numbers here, but you bring 260, you charge at $10, boom, you already have 2,000, excuse my math if it's wrong, but 2,600 people. I think that's right. Oh, math was never my strong subject. Well, actually it was. But it's 2,600 actually. So you get $2,600 in revenue. Okay, you pay the venue's expense, you might pay, the talent buyer, and then you might pay photographer, videographer, but you're still left with profit. But the issue with artists is that they don't know how to perform. That's a problem. Like, how is the biggest revenue generator touring that you don't know how to perform? You don't even know how to put on a show, right? And we talk about this. There is something called the performance effect. Is whenever an artist performs, they leave an impact or resonate within their fans, old fans and new fans. But you have to be offering something new to your performance every time, which brings us to the performance rubric.
Well, before you go on, sorry to interrupt, but before you go on to that piece, when you talk about performance, there's two aspects. Obviously, I think that if the person is talented and they can sing or they can rap or whatever they're doing, and they're entertaining as far as the quality of their music, that's one thing. But when you're talking about performing, there's also that aspect of their stage presence, and I think you have to marry the two.
Exactly.
Otherwise you're good in the recording studio. I mean, that's awesome, but you can't be on stage, right?
Exactly, and that's what I was saying. It's just like I was just about to get there too, because I have something called the performance rubric, which talks about engaging with the art, engaging with the fans, which is maybe you bring a fan up and they're actually doing the lyrics, right? And they're singing your song, right? And you're engaging with them. You have presence on stage, right? Let's say you bring a whole live band on the stage, right? So let's say as a rapper, you've been rapping all alone by yourself, and you bring a whole live band. That changes the experience for people after the show and makes them want to become more of a fan. People that were new, they become fans. People that were there become more of a fan, right? People are more willing after seeing those shows, after seeing it's kind of like going to drama. Right after they see drama, there's something makes them want to go back to the drama. That experience makes them want to go back, and that's what artists need to realize is so crucial. Is that they need to capture that experience and give people the experience to why to come back. That helps generate income, right? Just simply by just having your brand. Like, I've seen a lot of artists go on stage wearing brands that make no sense. Why are you wearing a Champion shirt? Like a Sports Athletica, if you don't even play sports, right? If your branding is not around sports, that doesn't make no sense. Like, that fucking makes no sense. Why not wear your own brand, right? So from, Guided by Obas is my brand, I should be wearing a Guided by Obas t-shirt or some type of something that represents my brand on stage. in terms of merchandise, right? In terms of marketing myself, how am I marketing myself after the stage so I can actually leave that impact on people, right? So we talk about live performance, which is so crucial. I'm so glad that you bring up about engaging, having that stage presence, because that's crucial. And a lot of artists have not developed that, right? Another way of generating income, again, is streaming, but it's not the biggest way, right? You only we got moving through streaming platforms and we got playlists. Everybody's big on playlists. Like playlist is supposed to be the thing playlist is the new radio, apparently, right? But the situation is the barrier to entry to find these playlists to help you stream, to get all the money, it's hard. So you go through third-party playlists where you pay to stream, which makes no sense. Yeah,
and sorry again, but Anthony, but when we talk about streaming, and and I've talked to so many musicians, and I think that obviously the days of CDs that's gone. Recording studios gone. I talk about this on my podcast as well, because it's really changed the game. The streaming has changed the game to the point where it's easy for indie artists to put their stuff out, but the problem is it's easy for indie artists to put their stuff out, and you're not the only indie artist out there. So what are you going to do? What are you going to do if 200,000 other of you are putting out their streams, and what are you going to do to make sure that I listen to your stuff over somebody else's stuff that maybe sounds similar to you, but now that the streaming is so easy to just pull your phone up and stream, you don't have to go out and buy a CD, and listen to whatever 10 songs or 12 songs on there. You can listen to 200 songs, and have, you know what I mean? But the other problem that I'm seeing is that not only is it competition, but you might be hot now. In this year, you might be the Jonas Brothers, where you're hot right now. But in a year or two, guess what? One Direction's on the scene, and then 2 years later, it's the Korean band. There's every single year there's a new boy band. So what's going to keep you relevant? You might have your stuff streaming, and you might be making a couple dollars on it. It's not going to be huge, but what's going to make you have? You have to reinvent yourself. The way I look at it, even on streaming, especially on streaming, you got to keep reinventing yourself and keep yourself relevant. Don't you think?
100%. You have. That's why it's so crucial that you keep putting out content. You keep coming out with new substance. You keep performing, right? Because again, streaming doesn't, like you said, streaming doesn't make that much money compared to back in the days when CDs used to sell. Vinyls, for God's sake, used to sell, right? They don't make that. I said in the book, like if you stream on Spotify, let's say me and you stream Jonas Brothers together. Jonas Brothers is making less than a penny on Spotify. That doesn't make any sense.
Literally.
Right, literally. Where do you come up with the situation of, streaming is the number one revenue for us to generate, right? The thing is, let's switch the topic of streaming to actually, you know what? If I can't stream it, let's see if we can buy the album. Even though people will say, okay, please, like album sales are not moving as well too. Artists are not even offering it. But stop going what the trend says and actually offer it. Because people will generally buy it for you. You know what I'm saying? This is where the price of negotiation comes in. Okay, if you buy my album, you get to the next show for free.
Yeah. No,
if you buy my album, you get 50% off at my next show. Boom, that's $15 you just generated.
Yeah, I talk to other musicians that do, like I said, the streaming thing. It's a great way to get your stuff out there. However, I don't think it's as much of a money generator as it used to be with CDs and albums. But like you said, we're going back to live performing again, and it's really, as far as generating income as an indie artist, you really have to perform live, and you have to have a business sense about even doing that. I one of my greatest friends, Michael Castaldo, he's an Italian tenor, but this guy is meticulous about his shows. He's meticulous about where he performs. He's got a following that follows him everywhere. And the reason he has that following is because he treats his fans like family. And that's another thing where if you're doing shows, do you have a VIP area set up afterwards where people that pay maybe $10 extra get to, take pictures with you, you can sign their CDs, you get to hang out with them and have snacks, whatever. But it's all about the way you treat people is going to keep them coming back. It's almost like a customer, right? When you have a customer and you treat that customer right, they're going to keep coming back and shopping with you. It's no different than being, when you're an indie artist. The way I look at it is that your customers are your audience, and if you treat your customers badly, you're not going to shop there anymore. So it's almost like you're running a business is exactly what it is. You
really are running a business. You're running a business selling your experience and selling brand value. And that's what artists need to realize, that once they're able to do that, once they're able to get the branding identity like we talked about, once they're able to understand that, hey, maybe streaming is not the platform. Maybe let me figure out a way to kind of run this and price it together with people actually buying my album. Maybe they buy my album percentage off of shows, or maybe they buy my album, they get something for free in the mailbox, something like that. Hey, like product bundling works, right? In terms of streaming, if for live shows, it's like, how can I make it an experience for my, like you said, customers to come back? Like, you want people to come back and talk to people and say, oh my God, did you see this man hanging off the roof and performing? Like, I'm not gonna lie to you, I've never seen somebody do that, but that would be hella fucking sick if an artist performs on top of a roof.
Yep.
But but you've offered an experience for people to come back, and that's what we're trying to do with shifting your music into a career. It's trying to get those people that are fans to come back to your brand and keep reinvesting on you. And how can we attract newer people into that audience by constantly putting out content that matches your brand identity? And I think that's great. I think it's huge.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely spot on, and that's the the one thing about and I know you're a fairly young guy. I mean, you basically just graduated from Syracuse, right?
Yeah, Syracuse University, a fairly new guy, but like I said to you before, I've seen success, right? I've seen success working with indie artists. Like, I worked with Nick Moody, Shy Leezy, Jahar. Like, I've seen how these indie artists move, and it's incredible, right? I started working with Nick Moody about, a year and a half ago, and like, I seen him, pack a show out, right? Solely on the power of him, he sold over, he had more than 50 people at the show, right? Just solely off of himself. You get what I'm saying? That says something as an artist. He has merch for people to buy. Shy Leezy has generated a lot of streams off of his latest project, Strictly for My Habibis. Jahar, who's only like a 20-year-old, 19, 18-year-old kid, who sold out his first show. The book works. You know what I'm saying? And, a lot of people will say, you're a young kid, for you to write this, it's just not in your position. I'm just telling people, like, if I see it work, I think other people see it as well, too.
I don't even look at it as your age. The reason I bring that up is because, this generation, the younger generation, the 20-somethings, the 30-somethings, those are the ones who are going to be the ones I'm listening to. I'm not listening to somebody who's my age or older. I'm 51, but I'm not going to listen to anybody my age or older that doesn't know the way things work now in not only the music business, but just in life in general. You think about the social media generation, you got people my age or older that don't even know how to get onto, buy an app on their phone, or download an app. I mean, or figure out, Zoom conferencing. I mean, these are things that, I'm going to go to the younger generation to learn about the way things run now. And especially in the music business, people that are, in your age group, you know a hell of a lot more than people that are in my age group, even though I've been in the business for 25 years. I'm not on the front line anymore like I was, 10 years ago. And things change. I mean, even the last decade, think about the last decade, where not only social media has blown up, but it evolves every single year, where if you're not on top of your social media, you're not on top of, the different, platforms out there and streaming platforms, and you're not, game with it all, you might as well just close up your shop, because you're already far behind. You're behind the competition, and you're going to be left in the dust if you don't get, you know what I mean? You have to keep up with the social media. And for me and my daughters in your age group, I go to my daughter for everything. I go to my daughter and my son. Hey, how does this work? What do I do here? If it's anything to do with social media or anything to do with the way things run now from a technology standpoint or anything, I go right to them. I'm not going to, pretend that I know more. I don't, I really don't. So again, that's the reason I brought that up is because I think that generation, your generation, is really who's going to, push us forward as far as indie artists. And, I think, everybody that's listening, got to get this book because it's going to help you as an indie artist, even if you're not a young indie artist and just starting out. If you're an indie artist that's been around for years, this book can still help you out. So go get it.
Definitely go get it.
Where can they get it, Anthony? Where do we get it?
They can get the book on Lulu.com. They can get the book on my website, www.guidedbyobas.net. Personally, they could DM me on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter, and I can just mail it to them. We got Barnes & Noble as well, too. So Barnes & Noble, Amazon, and Lulu.com. So that's where the book is available.
Well, let's go. What are your handles on your social media?
Yeah, so on Facebook, it's Anthony Obas. You can go tune in there, friend request me. I'm a cool dude. I don't think so. Instagram is Anthony ANTHONY_OBAS on Instagram. Twitter is Anthony_Obas44, and then LinkedIn is just Anthony Obas. So literally, if you look up Anthony Obas on any platform, I am there.
All right, man. Let's blow Anthony up let's buy his book and do it the right way. Anthony, I can't thank you enough, man, for being on my show. And like I said, as far as the masterclass goes, we're going to have other series, after this. But again, I think this was perfect for what I'm trying to do out there for the indie artist, and I think your message is great. And I think people really need to buy your book and listen to what you're writing and really kind of put it into practical use. So I thank you again. You're welcome on the show anytime, man.
Dave, thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it. Go Stage Doors Show. Let's go, baby.
Thank you. Talk to you soon.